Welcome to the Workforce Situation Room, where we spotlight some of the promising and innovative solutions that address some of our most pressing workforce and economic challenges, getting in the way of our mission at Workforce Solutions Borderplex. That mission is to power the people with the tools and opportunity to reach their potential in the workforce, and ultimately, our goal is to develop area businesses and the economy. I'm Bianca, your host, and I stand alongside our ladies of leadership at Workforce Solutions Borderplex with Leila Melendez, our CEO, Alma Aranda, Workforce Development Director, and Karina Castillo, our Senior Research Analyst. In this room, we all believe every situation has a solution. Here's the situation. Gender issues have always existed when it comes to the workforce. Whether it's the wage gap, earnings gap, childcare access, and yes, it's 2021, but discrimination is still alive and well. COVID came in and pulled that curtain back further, exposing and exacerbating these problems. Gender issues in the workforce are glaring, and we've been highlighting the data that proves it every month in our labor market review. And this actually we started considering we need to let everybody know what's going on. So this labor market review takes a look at what's going on in the workforce in the state of Texas, and we localize it to something that's relevant, data that's relevant to the Borderplex. And Karina is the one that mines all the data. And at one point, Leila kind of stopped everything and said, we need to start including women's data. So last year, I want to say December is when we started incorporating women's data. And that report was probably the most extensive report when it came to all of the issues, the real hard truth of the issues that women face in the workforce. So what that did, and I know that there was an inspiring moment for Leila that started this committee that we established called We at Work, the acronym standing for Women's Equality at Work, and then our tagline being Women's Equality is a Work in Progress. So that committee is comprised of Karina, Alma, Leila, myself, and another individual, Janelle Valles. We've been working together and having discussions about what it is we need to do for women and what types of programs we need to implement at WSB. But my first question is I know that we're knee deep in the Women's Committee, but I want to ask Leila, what was that inspiration that had you tell everybody we need to set up a Women's Committee, we need to do something about this now?
So I think my reason for wanting to do it is because I want to prove the issue in a black and white manner on paper. Like, here's the data. We can't run from it and we need to address it. And I think back to personal situations, personal stories of my mother and the situations she went through, former bosses, former colleagues, and the things that they have gone through. And when they've spoken about those things over my life, that I've heard these stories, whatever, and maybe it's the stories have been repeated, but the folks that have been around it it's anecdotal. So then the conversations, but there's always a reason for why that situation happened and why women have been allowed, or why this has been allowed to happen to women for as long as it has. There's always some anecdotal reason why it's been justified. And I can't accept that anymore. I need to just show the data of where we are. And when we put data up on a screen, you can't say, but there is no justifiable, but there's reasons why, but they're not necessarily good reasons. And it's especially not good to repeat those reasons or repeat those excuses. And it's interesting to me when we do show the data and it shows where women lie in leadership roles or in wages or all of the different things, and shows how far behind we are even today in 2021. And the responses from the audience is you can't, but your way out of this. And there's just like this deer in the headlights look, because you cannot run away from that truth. And it's just a hard fact. And I don't need, buts, excuses, reasons, etc. We need to just move from that point on and with action and say, here's what we're going to do about this to try to move this needle. That's it. So and I think that the reason why we've created this committee and when we've put this data out there is because it is just facts and it's not a story. It's not a situation that happened to this person for whatever reason. It's facts. It's just hard data as a whole, as half of the population. And we need to just address it.
I just wanted to add, I remember when we started doing some of the data mining for the dispelling the myths. Remember that whole LMI tour that we were doing? And as we kept digging and we use this analogy, like peeling back the onion, right? The different layers and keep going. Layla's like, I want to see what are like the hot jobs against, cost of living. And then we just kept going deeper and deeper. And when we started comparing here in our region, wage comparisons, and then we started to take a look at women, that's when everything that I had heard all my life growing up, the glass ceiling, the buts, that when like Layla said, when you see that on a slide deck, there's nothing like that moment because and that's here in our region. So, when you talk about some of the buts were like, well, the disparity, the equality issues, women of minority,
We're on the border,
all those things. Mm-hmm. But when you see that happening here in a very prevalent minority border city, like you've got all the makings already, like that's already ingrained. And then you still see that vast disparity of wages. That's when it was like really urgent. And then of course, COVID has just completely blown everything out of the water and put a spotlight on that. So
it's almost as if, because I felt the trigger moment, just even doing research, not only just looking at some of the data you all have mined, but when the Women's Committee first started, I kind of just started digging through my own research, investigating, well, what's going on and what really is the issue? And on a global, national, and local level, that jaw drop, that punch to the face type of jaw drop, not shock jaw drop, is like 200 years before, and I keep saying the number 200 because it blows my mind, before women and men could be making the same amount of money based on the pace and progress that we've had. So it's like that trigger moment. And that's essentially what we're trying to do with this data on a monthly basis, reporting it, reminding people, and hopefully having more, as much as I hate to say, punching more people in the face, not literally, right? But sometimes, just kidding. Mm-hmm. But getting that information out there. And I want to talk really quickly, and because Layla, you kept saying, but the but. And we're kind of coming off of this energy right now. We were coincidentally at a conference for women with Her Element Network, and the name of the conference was the Chingona Conference, right? Which is kind of intense. It's an intense word. Chingona is kind of, it's actually a curse word in Spanish. But because of it's a punch to the face again, and it needs that type of intensity, I think, in order to bring attention to these things. So we were talking about these things like the buts and all of this just acceptance of this. It's just the way it is. But Layla, can you really quickly talk about that phrase that you came up with while you were up on that panel? Because I immediately brought out my phone and visualized it. I knew what I was going to make the logo look like, and everybody started laughing. But tell us a little bit about that very moment.
So we're sitting up there and we're talking, and something that we hear a lot about, and we're coached and we worry about, because we've just been conditioned this way as women, is our appearance. And one of the things that we really focus on a lot is our butts, like literally our butt, right? And so we're sitting there and we're talking about this, and I'm hearing the other speakers talking about the reasons why we take ourselves out of the game, whether it's a job or a raise or volunteering for a board or being on something, right? Whatever it is, playing an instrument or doing a sport or whatever. We are our first person to tell ourselves no. And because we always have a butt, we always find our own big butt, right? So I'm like, that's the biggest butt that we have to worry about. It's not literally our behind, it's the butt that we tell ourselves every day. Oh, I should do this, but I should do that, but I'd like to do this, but there's always that big old butt that stops us. So, and I think that this is again, going back to the point of this women's committee. This was urgent before COVID, but COVID really has given it an opportunity to be prevalent and at the top of the conversation, because this is not something, it wasn't even planned or on its way to get fixed pre-COVID. Now, post-COVID, we've like actually moved in the opposite direction. Now we have even more to make up. And us putting data, doing programs that focus on women's issues, it's like that. And we heard this today, repeat the message. It's not a limited edition newspaper article, right? That's like a special edition. It's the daily section that you look at. It's there in your face all the time. It's not just a special edition. Oh, today we're going to talk about women's issues. No, every day is women's issues. And that's what we need to get to, that it's not a special conversation, because that makes it seem completely unattainable. If it's that special or that hard, that difficult, it just makes it something that we can't get to. But it needs to be, whether we think we can fix it in a 200 years or 5 years, the point is we have to make it every day, the norm. Every single day, we're going to just keep working towards this, because this is just not acceptable. It wasn't acceptable pre-COVID. It's not acceptable now. And it's not going to be acceptable until we get to the point that we agree we're cool with. And if that means, we exceed the goal, whatever that ends up being, then we just exceed it. We just keep going. But we just need to make progress every single day, not a special project type of progress.
Agreed. And with that data mining, because COVID brought it on, right? And we really started specifically searching for data points when it came to attainment, when it came to childcare, wages. Karina, you were knee deep in this. What was what were the points that stood out to you? Because I know we had a conversation about one LMR that made us cry, right? Because we realized how many families were on unemployment. But were there any moments like that for you when you were looking through the data for women?
I just wanted to give you 5 critical points regarding the women. And the first one, I'm going to start with wages. Women earn 72 cents to a man's $1. So there is a big difference.
And that's here locally?
Yes.
Okay.
This is all this regional.
Okay.
And the other key point is that of all the women that were working, 66% were working full-time. What it means, the rest, why they were not working full-time? Maybe because they were taking care of their children. They couldn't work because of that. Or maybe because they were taking care of their parents. Or maybe they didn't have the education to get a job, to get a good job.
Mm-hmm.
Talking about the education, 31% of the women have a degree. Only 31%. What about the other 70%? The degree I'm talking not only bachelor's degree, I'm talking about associate's degree.
Really? Okay.
It's a big one, either associate or up. They don't have only 31%. The other one I wanted to talk about, the poverty rate. We here in El Paso have 18% that are poverty rate, but if you look at only the women, it's 20% poverty rate. Overall in this region is 18%.
And can you define what poverty rate is? Like what is that in terms of wages? What is that in terms of earnings?
Yes. Every year there is the federal poverty guidelines that comes from the government. I was looking that the poverty was $6 an hour. So in this case, 20% of our women in this region are in poverty rate.
I see. Now, can we say that poverty is something that everybody has to pay for? It's safe to say that, because if somebody
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the biggest myths that we need to show with the data and dispel is that it actually costs more. What's kind of going on right now what we hear a lot is almost this shaming, right? There was a shaming of you're on unemployment and you don't want to go back to work and you're being lazy. I mean, let's just call it what it is. There was so much backlash of that. And I know on the surface level, it appears like that might just be like, well, just go back to work. But when you start, what COVID did is really kind of pull back the curtain on a lot of the things that we've kind of always known, but like now we have to address, right? Because everybody's experiencing this. And so when you're looking at, from a social standpoint, from an equity standpoint, it seems like, well, people need to get themselves out of poverty. It's really easy to say that, but it actually costs a lot less to support somebody to get them there than versus them having to do it on their own. So there's this whole thing called like a cliff effect, right?
Mhm.
And when you're when you're dependent on government subsidies or you're needing assistance, obviously not by design, but that's just kind of the way it's worked. So there's this notion of like people who are poor need to work themselves out and just kind of get there. And I think right now we're at this moment in society where there's like this, like people aren't just not going to put up with it. Like they're past the shaming. Like that's not going to get them there. And we're seeing that not only with people who are impoverished or, are resource poor or have these financial barriers, but even across the spectrum of people who are maybe not struggling so much. It's really kind of one of the things that COVID, I think, has revealed is everybody deserves quality of life. And actually, Karina did this great study a couple years ago. What it really costs to maintain, support somebody and put them through training and work experience, subsidize them, kind of help them get there, be that safety net for them to be off of assistance versus just making them work in a minimum wage job and how long they stay on assistance. And the rates are incredible.
That's awesome. And really quickly, I'm going to introduce Charmaine Payne, who's our new family services director. She was listening in on the conversation, and we wanted her to kind of feel us, just understand who we were. And she would like to weigh in a little bit on what we're talking about.
Well, I think what Alma is explaining, the cliff effect, we see that in the world of social services, whether it's having to do with poverty, incarceration rates, whether it's gun violence and shooting, we see the effects of the cliff effect.
Right.
This is just symptomology of what's happening. COVID being the great equalizer, now everyone in the big house and the small house have all been affected by COVID. Now everybody's kind of ready to regather and to redo. What I see as problematic, and if you look throughout the studies, the histories in the 1990s when TANF came about, the change of the welfare system, the whole piece of shaming people that are working jobs that are at minimum wage, we have to change the system itself. The system is what perpetuates the poverty. That's right. I can't make over 25,001 penny, or I can't get the subsidy that I need to support my family.
There's no weaning off. It's
right.
like you're cut off, and that's the cliff effect exactly.
And the cliff effect is what is problematic. And I think that if we take our resources and look at that piece, the cliff effect, how has institutional bias, racism, policies that we implement based on what we've always done to oppress different people, whether it's women, whether it's race, however it's stratified. If we look at deconstructing, because now we can't really pretty up what we have to totally deconstruct and start from scratch. What is it going to take to make this family of four floatable or reliable? What is it going to take to make this single parent able to obtain their degree, get a better paying job, get off the system that we actually created and put them on when we look at it? So in fact, poverty, we all pay for poverty and we all have a role in poverty. And I think if we're really clear and honest about that, for women being at 56% at the poverty level, that's very telling. So what is it about women? Is it because we have children? Is it because we take care of families? What is that fundamental difference? And that's what we have to deconstruct in order for us to move forward. So you're dead on. The poverty cliff, that's something we need to pay attention to and work. And that's where we have to hold our legislators accountable, but also we have to implement that right policy. It's good to have a subsidy, but does that subsidy actually reach everybody or just this small percentage that you're saying that's on poverty? What about the ones that are in between, the people that we miss, or the ones with the good paying jobs that really can't afford childcare? There's a whole subculture, a whole sect of that out there, and we haven't even begun to touch that.
So something that just occurred to me as I hear the ladies talking, we just came from this conference, this empowerment conference. And maybe there were about 60 women in the room and then about another 25
There
virtual.
were 72
Okay, awesome. So
at the peak.
So I mean, we talk about the importance of that and reminding ourselves and the empowerment. And one of the things we heard over and over was, don't be afraid to ask for that raise. But you know what I completely took for granted sitting there? How many women were like, because I will lose something from it. And this is one of those stories that I know of where a woman was up for a raise and she said, no, don't give it to me because I will lose my benefits. How horrible must that have felt for her? So the leaders in an organization of who we are, we can't on one hand tell women to empower themselves to go and ask for a raise if we're not actually going to fix the other end that's not going to penalize them for that raise. So we've got to fix both ends of that problem and understand the cause and effect of every single one of our ideas and policy decisions. We have to figure out the consequences, unintended consequences. One of those being childcare workers earn so little, let's raise up their prices. Well, if you raise up those wages, then childcare becomes even more expensive and half of those people are not going to be able to afford it. It's hard to afford it today.
Yeah.
Personally, I remember when my eldest daughter was going to start going to college. I was kind of like not laid off. I was volunteering, working. It was just like one of those things. But we started going through our savings of what we had saved for her. And I realized, and then I started working right again. And it was one of those things where we were just making enough where she didn't qualify for Pell Grants.
Mm.
And it was just a really hard realization. I mean, and here she is like an awesome student. And in the back of my mind, I'm like, I'm not sure what we're going to do because we just used everything that we had to kind of get her started to survive the last, year and a half. And, but, luckily, I mean, she had some scholarships, stuff like that. But it was very revealing to me, like how many families are going through that. So not only you're talking about like what Karina was mentioning, I mean, the fact that if you're a household of one, in order to qualify for some of these programs, and you're working full time, which everybody wants you to be working, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have to be making $6 an hour. That's illegal. That's illegal. You cannot make that money, right? So right off the bat, you're like, boom, you're not going to be eligible. So it's like all these mixed messages, like empower yourself, do this, do that. Oh, but then there's this like reality side of this, right? The flip side of the coin. And I think that's what's really important. So this is such a big issue. I mean, it really is. And I'm glad that Liz said earlier, like whether it takes us, 5 years or, another 100 years or whatever, it has to be an everyday thing that we're talking about. And I am a true believer that in this country, there's opportunity for everybody, but it comes at different paces for different people in different ways. But that's what these systems are for. That's one of the beautiful things about this country. But we have to make it accessible. And I think, to your point, Charmaine, when we're looking at policies and legislative agendas, it's meant well, right? It's meant to serve the ones that need it the most. But there's so many people that are being negatively affected by it, and that's what we're advocating for right now.
Absolutely, 100% agree. And these shame conversations about, people are too lazy to work. I don't know. I'm sure you all have personally had conversations where you have to almost school people. And I'm really grateful for our monthly LMRs getting there because I've been able to like pull weaponry out of my memory. Like, well, actually, and like I've been the one to say, well, actually, and might have even, ruffled some feathers with it. But when you have the truth and when you have facts and it's black and white and you can even pull it up on a website if you have to, like when you have that, you can be very diplomatic in how you call somebody out and say, you're actually really wrong. That's not the situation. People aren't lazy. And if you think of it this way, we're a fraction of people maybe might be, milking the system. There's always going to be that,
right?
But it's not the narrative. And I'm going to correct that. And that's how I actually go into the conversation about childcare. For me, and just for my common thread here is what I'm seeing when it comes to women. Oftentimes it's because they don't have childcare or they can't afford childcare. That is the biggest thing that I'm constantly seeing. So it's a really good softener to a tense conversation when you start talking about children and moms. And then you bring it, if there's women involved in the conversation, then you get to a relatable point like, oh, I'm a mom, I can understand. And you almost neutralize to where if they don't side with you, you've at least neutralized them and you can continue having dinner or drinks or whatever.
But that's very real. Like in my situation, I remember when, I mean, it wasn't even like a furlough. It was just like they literally couldn't pay me, and they're like, "But we still need your help." And I was like, "Well, I can try to come. Like maybe I can try to keep coming." And my husband was like, "If the roles were reversed, he's like, you were not put up with that. Like, there's no way that you would be like, oh yeah, go volunteer because." But when I have to kind of really look at it, I'm like, okay, what am I paying for gas? What am I paying for childcare? And just everything that kind of goes into being able to even get to the job. And I was like, yeah, like no matter, like it's not gonna work out. So I had to kind of really say, like, I will volunteer maybe like once or twice a week for you, but I'm not working anymore. And that's the first time that I was ever unemployed in my work life, right? I mean, that was like the reality of it. And that's where I think now, like with some of these families, like, and women opting out, well, yeah, there's a reason for that. You know what I mean? Like, what are we thinking that we're going to pay them to make them go back to work with everything kind of going on and everything that has been exacerbated with COVID? Absolutely. I mean, I can definitely see where so many families are making that choice.
Well, I think it's a choice for life. Do I live? Do I survive with my family in a protective environment, or do I go back out to work and expose myself and my family? And then what happens after
That's right.
that? It's a choice that people have to make, but specifically women have to make this choice. I found myself, I was furloughed. I was a federal worker that was furloughed.
Mm-hmm.
And can you imagine you work for the federal government and there's no check?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't qualify for benefits. I couldn't go to a bank and say, I might get paid, but I couldn't do any of that. Either you have to have it or you don't. And so cars get repossessed, people lose houses. The economy affects everyone. When we're in a space where you have to choose for life, that looks a lot different. And so that shame talk that we kind of float around, that's the way to oppress people. And we use it. It's socialized in cultures, every culture. And the dominant culture that shames you into, well, you should go back to work for the $7.50. Well, how am I going to pay for gas? Do you want me to walk there? Wait a minute. I got to drop my baby off on the way. Hold up. My rent is due. I can't turn on the lights. I mean, it's a whole situation and people don't even understand that. And I think that the well-meaning, when we go to legislation, it's well-meaning. I get it. In a former life, I used to lobby and you would talk to people that did not have any experience
Boots
or
on the
any
ground
clue,
experience,
right?
Yeah.
But you would create these big laws and put these safeguards in them to save the money. When if we put the education and the energy into where it needs to be, we don't have to create these big sweeping laws that really keep people in oppression. And so I believe that being able to have that voice and saying, no, I'm not coming to work because my health is at risk, and having some way to support your family with this current administration. I think that has been a great thing that has been introduced with the COVID legislation, because people didn't have a voice. So people were working sick. People were making each other sick. And then we would blame the minority communities for spreading the virus. Can you imagine? I have to go to work, but you're telling me I can't not go to work, and so all of these things collide and we have to really dissect them and work on equitable solutions. If you're a mom and you want to stay home and you want to keep your children, well, what you save in daycare, online school, all of that, I think that's amazing. And so we have to kind of change the way we think about what progress looks like.
And in the whole thing that you said about COVID being the great equalizer, it's almost as if that equalizer needs to be directed at childcare itself. Because you said it, Layla, everybody needs childcare, right? But everybody needs to be so at a certain wage level or almost at poverty to get childcare. So let's say that they get the childcare, they get a promotion at work and they get the raise, and then boom, they're in a deficit again. They're back in poverty having to pay the childcare. So there's that issue, right? One of the big situations there. And then you have the issue of the shortages we have with childcare because of COVID, because people are like, I'm not going to risk my health. I'm not going to go into an at capacity for 88 an hour. Is that the average, right? I mean, so then, okay, well, let's raise the wages. Let's make the childcare a living wage. Okay, well, how much more expensive does childcare
It's already
get?
a challenge. And you know what? Really
How do we
quick,
fix that?
On the COVID, yes, absolutely. COVID was an equalizer in across the globe. I mean, that's the pandemic, right? But when you kind of start digging deeper into the data on how it affected some people more than others,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like, for example, let's be real. We all had the benefit and the luxury of having remote work. In fact, we highlighted our success to easily transition into remote work because guess what? We had a CEO that had the foresight to have everybody be mobile way before, right? And that's actually, we brag about that. But so many people were not in that situation. So many businesses cannot do that. The effects of it, the trickle down effect is that's where I think the inequality and the disparities are really high. So we're actually working on a project right now to show like what's really happening with remote work and here in the region. And it's another depressing data point, when you're like looking at how many minorities and women did not have access to remote work here in the region.
I mean, I'm blessed to have not been in that situation, but it's important for us to put ourselves in those situations. And we're not far. You talk to your family and friends here in this community. You're not far from that situation. You know someone in that situation that does not have choices, does not have the luxury of saying, I don't want to go to work because I'm fearful of getting sick. I hope I don't get sick today. I'm going to work. I hope nothing happens to me. So we just have to remember that some people don't have choices. And sometimes perhaps they're not even looking up at the different resources and options that could be available because you're like almost conditioned to believe that this is just it. This is just life. That needs to be for us unacceptable. And how do you fix that? Is that we have to look at all of the things that we do, the programs, the ideas that we come up with. It's not because of a funder or an agency said, you all have to do this. We have to really look at the community and determine what is really necessary and how do we shape it to meet those problems, to solve those problems that are there. But what's hard is making a dent in a problem at your local community level. The way you do that is by realizing that these problems is not somebody else's problems. It's all of our problems. We've contributed to that. We've enabled this behavior as a society.
Absolutely. I mean, sometimes these things it doesn't feel good. You know what I mean? But that's one of the things that Layla has always challenged is like, put the data up there. Like, is it going to hurt some people more than others? Absolutely. But it's still, it's the reality. And we hope that inspires a call to action. When Karina kind of took a look like, okay, you think that it's costing you this much, it's actually costing more. So, I mean, the number crunching, the economic fallout, all of that is there. It's just we need to kind of really own it and do something with it.
I mean, the data definitely drives it, but and we say this a lot, and we kind of pride ourselves in being able to extract the story out of the data. But what has the COVID data in terms of women and childcare particularly? What story can we tell listeners that it's telling us right now? And you can think about this a little bit because it's a
for me,
loaded question.
From an LMI. I mean, I'm getting nerdy, right? But from an LMI standpoint, I mean, all the focus has been when you're talking about childcare, it's all about the quality of care in the child. And that is absolutely critical. But the industry itself has been ignored as a business. Some people are like, well, raise the wages and pay the workers more. Okay, but then, but then there's this. So it's like this, there's no one easy solution. I think you're just going to have to kind of break it apart and rebuild a little bit, little by little, and look for pockets of innovation, of opportunities. But it really, this one is big. I'll never forget in the first executive order for President Biden, he talked about childcare. That's how critical it was for economic recovery. There is no recovery without that piece. And we just kind of have taken it for granted. I mean, it's even considered a service-related industry. Not in education. It's considered service. Among some of the similar SOC codes, it's like housekeeping and those type of services. Early childhood education, daycare workers. That should not be the case.
So I believe, right along that same vein, childcare, the story that COVID has written for childcare is that it's sort of kind of when the church went from being a mom and pop church situation to a 501c3 tax situation. And everybody was like, oh, well, what does Jesus have to do with taxes?
Absolutely.
This is exactly where we're at.
Right.
And so in figuring that out, Jesus and taxes is Jesus and childcare right now. This is kind of where we're at. And so the story that COVID has written for us is we know women are at higher rates of poverty. And it doesn't matter if it's in El Paso or Southern Florida or New York City. It is that way. We know our institutions are set up that way. And so how can we break down the childcare story? I, for one, used to watch the memes of the stimulus package. I used to get great joy of watching the stimulus package memes because it really made me feel good that now you got a choice. Yeah, stay home and collect your check because this is probably more than you had been making and based on a system that was set up for you not to make anymore. And so people felt all kinds of way. Oh, well, you're just collecting your stimulus. Please, honey, I want mine, and it was more so of this stimulus represents what you could be acquiring and how you could be impacting the economy. With the Biden and Harris administration, it just showed us how important the child care. And now you have employers that are saying, wait, come back to work for me. And people got choices now. I think that's amazing. I want to see more choices. I want to see more stimulus packages or packages geared to help people stay out of work until employers do what they're supposed to do to take care of the people. And it all goes together.
That's so perfect because if the stimulus package and the extra benefit amount was meant to kind of give everybody an equalizer, and a lot of people were freaking out, that just shows how broken everything really was. Like if that was the thing that kind of broke everything apart, oh, these people are not going to go back to work. That's an awful thing to think about. That's still, it's a little bit of an extra benefit that we were adding on to get people through this time.
Get people through it.
Were
It's a humane act.
I mean, when you see it, right? When you would see these memes and you would see these conversations, you're like, do you realize you're discounting a lifesaver being thrown out into the ocean? Somebody's drowning. Somebody's throwing them a lifeline, and you're saying, how dare you save that life? Do you realize how horrible of a human statement that is? This whole, I think, theoretically, and at some of the things that I think we struggled with, and I personally struggled with this year, was the psyche effect and the timing of why did COVID happen right here, and then it lasted so long, and everything that it's done to us. And I think it was a big message from the heavens, you guys need a big old lesson right now. That's right. You guys need to reprioritize. It's basically like a pre-meteor. You know, like I'm going to send you all a little warning, and realize, this project is on the verge of failing.
It's the only joke. That your project is a joke. Your system is the joke.
So like, let's rethink this. And you look at it from a human nature point of view, and then you start to balance all of these different images and stories and things that you hear and feel. And even still today, 18 months later, some of the things were that we just can't help but argue and are facing. And then we just realize, like, man, like the work is endless. There's just always going to be a lot of there's always going to be opinions and minds to change. But coming back to the very original question is, what was the shift? Is because it has to be, especially for women, not just because this is a woman-run organization, but it just needs to become a normal thing from now on. Like, it's just every day, it's part of our front page news. It is that urgent, and it's gonna be that urgent
and
for a very long time.
I mean, I like we've talked about this before, right? Like workplace culture. I remember my first jobs, like it was totally super normal for a guy to have like a really sexy calendar up on his office wall,
Oh my God,
right? Like it was, it was, but you know what? It's not okay.
That's right.
Because we kept talking like, that's not okay. That's not okay. Same thing with this. It's not okay for women to make, whatever cents on the dollar, regardless. Like, it's one of those things that the normalizing. But I really kind of want to talk a little bit about the dignity part, because something's going to give. Like, it really, really is. And this one makes me really heated. And so I apologize if I get emotional. And I don't know why I do this to myself. Sometimes I'll sit there and watch like things that I like are completely opposite of what my opinions
certain
are.
Networks.
Right? Certain networks that shall not be named. But
with bots.
No, but I also do that because I think it's important to see the other side, right, and understand, because that's in part of my approach. I want to understand. I mean, there's that, but there was something that was said a while ago, and this is by somebody that I watch the show like all the time. And they were talking about like how some people are like, oh, they're my wellness, and they're going on. And he brought up this story about he had a friend who's in the military, and that this friend in the military told him that they don't feed the dogs at night. They don't feed the dogs at night because they wake up hungry, and a hungry dog is a dog that can be easily disciplined to do the work. So they don't feed them until after they like work everything, right? So like they keep them hungry. And they were literally talking about, that's the story that came to this person's mind when they were talking about people going back to work and not wanting to go back to work, and the quality.
Oh my God. And that says everything. Animals versus humans.
I mean, like that comparison.
Yeah.
I just can't believe like it burned me, and it still stings to this moment. It's really hard. I mean, it's really hard to hear that.
It's unfortunate, but honestly, whomever it was that said that at one point in their life was taught that, and they come from a place of void, a place of hate, a place of deficiency where they don't have that.
But you
love,
think like
they don't
when somebody
have
hears,
support.
so somebody's hearing. I mean, this is on a national network.
Yeah, but if somebody else is hearing that, and then it reinforces that.
And then the person who is like that trickles down to. I mean, that's what I'm talking about. Like, where are we? That reset button that God's like, what are you guys doing to each other? You know what I mean? Like, literally. I mean, and believe it or not, I think that to Layla's point, what she said earlier, and very well, we all have a stake in this, whether we believe it or we're not. We're not just because we're in workforce development or we do data mining and we're great storytellers and we do advocacy. Like, literally, everybody does. The minute that you drive by and shame somebody for not working, or you're at a restaurant and you complain, all those things, this is a whole culmination of, and we have to really kind of be decisive of what we're going to do. So the advocacy has to continue. It has to be normalized.
So the question we have to ask ourselves is, what did you do today? What did you do? Not what my president did or my legislator. What did I do today to contribute to the changing of that thought, that hungry dog thought. In our society, it's kind of sad that we'll take care of animals before we take care of each other. And we see that time and time again when we turn on the news. So the change really in the advocacy is it starts with socialization from zero, how we socialize our girls, our boys, how do we talk to our women groups? Like who is in your squad and how are you supporting one another? What are you doing in your church? What are you doing in your community? What did you do today? It has to be at least one thing that you did today to invoke change, because that's how we fix it. How we speak to each other, how we acknowledge each other, how we support each other. That's how we get through.
Thank you so much, Charmaine. And we're going to close out because we've got a couple minutes left. But this is Charmaine's first time on the podcast. She's been with Workforce for a couple of weeks, and thank you for joining. But I do have one question for you, Charmaine, and I think you're gonna close us out really well. But what would you like to contribute as the Family Services Director to Workforce Solutions Portaplex, and what you will do?
All right, my supervisor's in here, so in every space that I am, and I want to create space wherever I am. And so as Family Services Director, I want to bring a global view and a global light as to what the issues are. What are the real issues? How do we drill down? And how does mental health, socioeconomic status, culture, how does all of that intersect? And it affects the workforce. How we need to, as a community, spaces that we've kind of been shy about approaching, especially in the mental health realm or the family experiences that each and every one of us have, but are connected in some way. I want to highlight that and bring that global view. I also want to be able to help shape and create usable policy and practices that are equitable and that people can use. There's no sense in having a tool if the key doesn't work. And so I would like to bring that world experience, that knowledge of being a social worker, a clinical social worker with a global view, and bringing all those intersections together to kind of guide the policy and impact my community. El Paso is my community, and that's my intention, and to create space while I'm here.
Thank you.
Yay.
Thank you so much. That was awesome.
Yeah.
WSB is in full force addressing these situations. Plans for the upcoming year involve community collaboration regarding early childhood education and childcare with our partners at Early Matters El Paso. Our new Family Services Director, Charmaine Payne, will dig deep when it comes to deconstructing the systems that don't work and supporting what's effective. If you'd like to join us in our mission to connect people to opportunity by providing not just individual solutions, but systemic problem solving for our communities, you know where to sound off. We don't always have a choice in the situations we face, but you do have a choice in subscribing to solutions. Join the Workforce Situation Room on your favorite podcast platform and hit subscribe. Will you find a solution to every situation?